Blog Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to episode number 83 of Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. I'm in a happy mood today, overall, in general, of late, so I'd like to ride that wave forever if possible. Please, that would be great. But of course, life has its fair share of twists and turns along the way, so I'll stay prepared for whatever arises. Eternal optimism with a subtle note of sorrow. I'm seeing a lot of ladybugs lately, a stroke of good fortune when signs of synchronicity start to flash. It's been so long, Lord, and I am thankful. Have remained so through all the hours in between, all the silence, impatience, waiting on this new song to begin. Amen. The main point being, there is a major energy transference taking place in my heart and mind and spirit right now, the sort of shift that takes my breath away, leaves and letters falling into place upon the page. Thank you for tuning in this evening. I'm your host, Scott Thomas Outler, and it is Monday, November the 18th, 2019. We'll be here live for the next hour, and I'll be joined in the next segment by tonight's guest, Kashiana Singh. She'll be coming on to talk about her poetry book, Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words, as well as the TEDx talk she gave on the theme of viewing work as worship. Kashiana appeared on an early episode of this program and gave a preview of her poetry, so I'm looking forward to speaking with her more in depth tonight and getting a chance to hear some more of her work. That will all be coming up shortly. I do encourage listeners to please take a moment and subscribe to the 17 Numa Radio channel. It's easy to do and it's free. All ye have to do is click the follow button found on the page where this episode is streaming, and that'll get you signed up. A reminder to everyone that all past episodes of Songs of Selah can be accessed or downloaded for later listening from the archive here on the channel or from the Songs of Selah page at 17numa.com. Please be sure to check out some of the recent episodes from this month when you're in the mood, featuring interviews with guests such as George Weinstein, Peter Rowitz, Donna Snyder, Raquel Mejia, and Sarah A. Etlinger. Thank you to each of them for appearing, and big thank you as well to everyone who spreads the word about this program and shares episode links. Your support is greatly appreciated. I'd be remiss if I didn't continue mentioning UGA football at this time of year after each of their victories as the season continues progressing in a most pleasing fashion. I wouldn't want to jinx the program from afar by not carrying out my proper duties as a true fanatic of the cause. This past Saturday, the team went on the road into hostile territory at Jordan-Hare Stadium and came away with a hard-earned 21-14 victory. It was a beautiful thing to behold, even the nervous moments in the fourth quarter when Auburn came storming back with two quick scores and then were driving again to potentially tie it up. UGA hunkered down as they are meant to do and stopped two drives at the end of the game. After the second fourth down stop, the offense could safely kneel down and run out the clock, allowing the celebration to fully commence. Now they're 9-1 on the season, sitting pretty in the fourth spot for the playoff berth, set up to play against LSU in the SEC championship game in just a few weeks. But first they have to continue taking care of business against Texas A&M coming up this Saturday, and then in a rivalry game with Georgia Tech at the end of November to close out the regular season. Nothing is easy or guaranteed at this point, with so much riding on the line, and a national championship still set squarely in the sights. So all good news on that front. It's a nice escape valve to take a break from the heaviness of the world and live vicariously through sports on occasion, though it all comes back to center eventually, and that's cool. A time and a place for all things. As I mentioned before, Kashiana Singh will be tonight's guest, and so I would like to kick tonight's episode off by reading a poem that particularly struck me from her book Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words. This piece is included in the final section of the collection and is titled Sharing. You are either in or out. There is no in between. You may choose to be a hermit, sharing from and with the universe. There is no out once you have signed up. You can agree to be a lover, sharing possibilities of adoration. There is no fitful sharing of love. You can commit to being a soldier, sharing death on grieving knees in battlefields. There is no looking away from that collective destiny. You can live the sibling dream, sharing ice cream, insecurities, jokes. There is no trading of memories in exchange for personal space. You may like to be religious, sharing the vastness with those that see only boundaries. There is no excuse for ignoring the gift of thanks. You can champion voices, sharing words in infinite passages of speech. There is no space for questioning. Sharing has just one rule, the rule of not being meek. Sharing is a participative sport. The brilliance of its metals is in its essential nature. Sharing is a map that is marked by bodies, speech, freedom, space, questions, education, books, civilizations, gods, Allah, Jesus, Buddha, Ram. All right, so that was Sharing by Kashiana Singh, and that will wrap things up here at the top of the show. Let's go to a music break now and play a couple of tracks recommended by Kashiana, and then we'll be back on the other side to speak more about her work. Stay tuned.
Every night in my dreams, I see you, I feel you. That is how I know you go on. Far across the distance and spaces between us, you have come to show you go on. Near, far, wherever you are, I believe that's the heart does go on. Once more, you open the door, and you're here in my heart, and my heart will go on and on. Love can touch us one time and last for a lifetime, and never let go till we're gone. Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad. Raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens, brown paper packages tied up with strings. These are a few of my favorite things. Cream-colored ponies and crisp apple strudels, doorbells and sleigh bells and schnitzel with noodles, wild geese that fly with the moon on their wings. These are a few of my favorite things. Girls in white dresses with blue satin sashes, snowflakes that stay on my nose and eyelashes, silver white winters that melt into springs. These are a few of my favorite things. When the dog bites, when the bee stings, when I'm feeling sad, I simply remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
Welcome back to Songs of Selah here on 17 Numa Radio. If there's anyone interested in appearing as a guest on a future episode later this year, please feel free to get in contact with me via email at 17numa@gmail.com or connect with me and reach out on any of the social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and I'd be more than happy to get you set up for an episode this year or early in 2020. Tonight's guest, Kashiana Singh, is a management professional by job classification and a work practitioner by personal preference. Kashiana's TEDx talk was dedicated to work as worship. Her poetry collection, Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words, presents her voice as a participant and an observer. She dips into very vulnerable and personal context, but also explores the shifting tectonic plates of the world around her. She is from India, now lives in Chicago, and bridges the miles by regularly etching her thoughts. She is a regular contributor to different poetry platforms like On Mogul, Literary Yard, Best Poems, Narrow Mag, Modern Literature, Women's Web, Tuck Magazine, Spill Words, and many more. She's in the process of gathering her second collection of poems for a chapbook expected in mid-2020. Kashiana, how are you doing tonight? Thanks so much for joining the show.
You just made me smile with those two songs, Scott. Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on. Yeah, can't help but be put into a good mood with that second one, especially.
Right. Yes.
So good recommendation.
I was literally skipping as I was listening to that.
So we've got a lot to talk about tonight. You've been on the program before and read a few of your poems, so I'm looking forward to getting in more in depth into your work, and maybe we could start off a little bit. Just tell us what poetry means to you and how you initially got started with it. How did it come into your life?
Poetry means everything to me. You are a poet yourself, and you speak to poets and live and breathe poetry, Scott, so it'll be good to hear from you as well. Poetry is what sustains me, what grounds me. It's my anchor. As you said in my introduction, my TEDx talk, or what I live and breathe for, is work is worship. So poetry is what brings the worship to my everyday existence. In terms of your question of how poetry came about and how it happened, I don't know. It's always been there. I know for sure that my earliest memory of poetry is my dad reading poetry at dinner table conversations. The earliest poems I remember are poems like "Oh Captain, My Captain," poems like Ozymandias, and his reading them and making us read them. And that's my earliest memory of poetry in the true sense of poetry. But how I started writing poetry, it wasn't really taught. Like, nobody told me this is what you need to do to write poetry. I do remember starting with rhyming poetry. I don't rhyme much now, but I also remember my dad being my first critique, and a tough one at that. He's thrown a book back on my face. He's thrown a paper back on my face, not liking what I wrote and asking me to rewrite and rewrite. Today you call that editing, I think. I don't think that's what it was called as I was growing up, but I guess that is what it was supposed to be. So that's how poetry became ingrained, Scott, as I was growing up. But I've always done it. I've always learned it. I've always had a notebook. When I start packing, I travel a lot for work now. I've traveled a lot growing up. You've probably browsed through my book, and one of my poems in that book is a collection of cities. So I've moved around. My father had a job that had to have him move around. And the first thing I remember always packing was a notebook and a pen. My children today laugh at me. I always gravitate towards the stationery section of a store whenever I go shopping anywhere. So that's really my history and geography with poetry.
So certainly infused into you from an early age and still lingers there through the years. That's beautiful. What do you think led you ultimately to put this collection together and release a book into the world? And how do you feel now that it's out there?
Again, my dad. I was very shy about putting it out there. I didn't think I was writing anything that was worth publishing. I wanted to publish it only because I wanted something physical to be able to gift it to him. This book came together for his birthday. He's a December baby. He's a December born, and the book came together, was released end December, early January this year. It was delayed. I wanted it actually to be released on his birthday, and somehow you know how the publishing process goes, and it was delayed, but I managed to get it out in January. So it really started with that purpose, but as it became more and more real, I started to have more confidence in my own work, and felt more confident to be vulnerable enough that I could see the words in print and be okay to put it out there in the world on paper. I was already, my daughter had encouraged me to put it out into the internet with my blog, and I'd been doing that for many, many years. So that process had started, but still somehow the process of putting it into actual paper, into actual print, was more scary. My hands are trembling even as I'm talking to you about it right now. And I feel good, to your point about how I feel now. I feel really good that I've done it. I wouldn't do it in a rush again. I'm in no hurry to do it again. but I would do it again, I think. And like I said, I'm in the process of collecting my next collection dedicated to a particular theme. And this time, it's more thoughtful and more intentional than just doing it as a gift for somebody.
Well, what a wonderful gift that must have been for him. How did he respond to it when it was released? And you also mentioned your daughter. How does the rest of your family revolve around
They love
poetry?
it. They love it. My daughter writes too. She writes both prose and poetry. Of course, she has to grow a lot into it herself and be her own writer, right? You have to find your own voice, but she does write too. And my daughter, my dad, of course, was absolutely delighted, and I received what I needed to receive by the look in his eyes when he had the book in his hands.
That's fantastic. So in this book, you break it up into 8 different sections. You cover a lot of different themes, from relationships to philosophical questions, seasons, nature, really all across the board. How did you decide on coming up with those particular themes, and then what was the process of organizing and putting the entire thing together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things. Even though I said I did not really think about publishing or putting it out there, I did think about publishing and putting it out there, right? So I always dreamt, that was a dream, like probably every poet's is, to have a book. And so I've always, over the years, been collecting and organizing poems and writing into a variety of different forms as well as themes. And remember, I'm a management professional, so I'm an organizer by habit. It's a compulsion. So I'm a project manager by compulsion as well. So every time I put something together every couple of months, then I do sift and sort. That's what keeps me going. So that's one part, right? So I did put themes and put them together and do things like that all along the way. But then as the book started to come together, Scott, that's when there seemed to start to form a natural flow that you see there. And there was an external process then that happened, which was very amazing, and I do want to share that. You do see that there are some illustrations in each section in the book as well. And the illustrations are by my friend, who I've never met. Her name is Japneet Kaur, who I reached out to. I saw her illustrations on one of another online community. And she and I started talking, and the collection or the themes started to crystallize further. And so that process almost became an organic process that further refined what my already existing combination of themes was, which then put together those 8 collective themes or the sub-themes that you see in the book. And that's how it finally then formed into what you see as the product or the end product.
So you mentioned that you grew up traveling to different places and then obviously moved at some point from India to Chicago, where you're at now. How do you feel the different experiences and environments that you've been in have shaped your work through the years?
Absolutely. I consider myself a product and my work a product of geographies. My tongue, whether it's the tongue of what comes out in the written word, my tongue as my spoken word, or just who I am as a person, and my philosophy as what I bring to my work every day, is a product of my movement across geographies. You will see that across, whether you see the section abridged, the place where I talk about abridged worlds, or whether you see it in the collection of cities, or whether you see it in the poem where I talk about bazaars. And then you see that I go into that poem where the poem is called Bazaars, which is a very Eastern concept. It's also a European concept. And then I actually talk about farmers markets and garage sales, right? So it's a very mishmashed output that takes into account what I've been exposed to and have experienced traveling across the breadth and depth of just my own birth country, which is India, but also the privilege and the pleasure that I've had with the grace of God, and of course the support of my family in traversing across the breadth of the world. The other factor, which is its own subject itself, is what it does to your political exposure, and what you see happening, especially in today's times, and how that shapes your inner aspects in what you see going on from the external. One of my sections, and hopefully if we have time, I would like to read that poem, talks about the India-Pakistan partition experience. As you know, it has a huge history, right? Many lives were lost, almost 2 million died, 15 million were dispersed. My own family has had the impact of that. My history, it has seeds in that partition. But then what I see sitting here in this part of the world, and what I see going on, and what I hear as the narrative around me as we speak of borders and fences, Scott, brings me back to the same stories that my grandmother and my great-grandmother told me about borders and fences in a completely different part of the world. So that influences what I write, and that influences what I speak about and narrate in my poetry as well. So there's the very inner emotional aspect, there's the physical aspect, there's also seasons. I was writing something yesterday, and another poet from a different part of the world told me that you can write so differently about autumn because you're living in the northern part of the world where you're able to actually experience autumn that you wouldn't have experienced had you been living in your birth country. And therefore, you're actually blessed to have been able to experience the summer of living in an equatorial country and the autumn of having lived in a city like Chicago. So I'm truly blessed, and I do try and bring that into my writing as well.
Well, you certainly get the cold winters up there where you are in Chicago now. Get to
yes, I do.
Experience that aspect. And
yep.
What you touched on there with the India-Pakistan situation still flaring up here again recently with the Kashmir event going on a couple of months ago, or continuing to go on, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yep.
So, being that you work a corporate job full-time as well, how do you find time throughout the day to write, and what sort of rituals or routines do you have when it comes time to put pen to paper?
If we were doing this on a video camera, you would see me right now. I'm actually standing and talking to you, Scott. I stand and work. I shifted my work ritual to standing, so I do stand and work as far as I can. It's hard to do it, but I've made that a habit because it helps me to stay centered, besides, of course, being good from a physical health, blah, blah, right? Keep that aside, but it helps me stay centered. If you were to do this video conference with me, I'm right now standing, and my hands and my palms are together, and what you said to me, the ritual answer to that is, and my family will vouch for me, is I have very limited time. So the time question is $1,000,000 question, right? We are all slaves of this thing called a watch and this thing called a clock and time. But I do have a ritual where I must write every single day. I can say that at least for the last 6 years, they may not have been except in like really exception situations where there's been death, illness, sickness, family situation. I don't think I have not written every day, whether it is one poem or two or 4 lines or 6. I do not go to bed without writing. As simple as that. It's like praying for me.
Having that diligence to continue that routine is so important, and constantly staying tapped into that creative, inspired energy. So kudos for that. And I had a flashback to the house I used to live in for 12 years before I moved to where I am now, and I used to do the same thing that you do. I stood up and paced around the house and then stood at the bar in my kitchen and wrote, and that was my routine for all those years.
Right.
So you just gave me flashbacks of a great time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard. I say it's hard for anyone who's listening. It's not like there are not moments when you want to give up or that you feel every day is not my best work, right? There are days when you look back and say, what crap, right? Like, let me put this into the garbage. But the discipline, to your point, Scott, is what I'm trying to keep, and it has helped me. It just helps me. So
certainly can't bring gold to the page every day, but it's so important to just continue churning it out, because then you do find those diamonds along the way. And the diligence comes back to the point you mentioned a little while earlier, I think, ties in with being obsessed with organization skills and having that sort of left side of your brain that's working, and then you obviously also have the spiritual, artistic side on the right. So how does that balance come into play, and how does that play into the TED Talk that you gave on the idea of work being worship?
Yeah. I am. That's a subject I have a lot of passion around, and I live and breathe that subject every single day, because for anyone, you yourself or others who live and work in the corporate world, I have been told by near and dear ones, and I know anyone who lives in the corporate world is a corporate slave, right? We are slaves of our needs. We are slaves because we need to live a worldly, material life. But how do you convert that slavery to be able to do and find those moments? You said the word diamonds and pearls, and moments that you can get your best out of and not feel like you're only doing and performing a job, right? And that's what I bring to my work every day. And it doesn't just have to be the real job, but everything that you do, whether it's for your children or you're doing your work around the house or you're tending to your lawn or whatever. I mean, it's the fundamental simplicity of what our parents and grandparents and forefathers used to do that has been lost along the way. I just have a huge passion to bring that to my work every day. And the simple examples, if you listen to what I've said in my talk, is, and this is a section in my poetry as well, and I'm choking a little here as I speak to it, Scott, as I lost a young brother, and I work with a lot of people who are of that age. So when I work with people of that age, I assume that I'm mentoring and coaching my brother, right? So how can I interact and make every interaction such that I am instilling a little tidbit of something to someone who I couldn't instill because he was taken away from me, right? I love poetry. I can't write poetry every day because, to your point, I don't have the time. but can I write an email to a client in a manner that I bring my poetic skills to that, such that there is more to that than just writing a simple client email, and we can go on. So it's very simple if you hear about it this way, but it's very, very difficult to do in the mundane of living a 9-to-5 existence.
Such a tragic experience, but the way that you've transfigured it and now are able to, in his memory, carry on and give that message out to other people is certainly inspiring. And it's a wonderful TED Talk. I encourage listeners to go check it out. There's a link in the show description box that will take you to that YouTube video of Kashiana's, and a lot of great wisdom in that, and just being mindful and thankful during the day-to-day activities as we go through them, and know that they're connecting us to the larger picture. So really enjoyed that talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott.
So what do you think some of the major aha moments or epiphanies or revelations have been in your life that had the most profound transformative effect on you?
A couple. One we just spoke about.
Right.
I think going through loss, and I don't think that's unique for me, right? We all know that. That's loss can transform and is a moment of test. It's a test of your personal resilience. It's also a test of relationship resilience. We have seen all around us and among our own relationships put to test when you go through an extreme situation of loss. And so that was one for me as well. From an external perspective, there were 3 or 4, and my poetry, and there's a section in the book that you will relate to when I share this with you, Scott, is there were 2 or 3 situations that happened almost really close to each other that shook me. I'm a woman. I'm really strong. I'm sure you see that, even if it's just you. But I have a voice, a standing of my own. My father taught me to stand up and look the other in the eye, right, and yet be really humble. Those were some of the things he taught me besides poetry. But 2 or 3 things happened really close to each other, and that shook me really badly and made me think really hard about what it means. I hate using the word feminism, but it made me really think hard about what respect for a young girl in a certain environment means, and what sending my own daughter, who's a young teenage girl, means as she goes out to college. And that is a young girl working for me within my organization was kidnapped, could not be found for 48 hours, and then was found murdered and discarded. So it was a very traumatic 48 to 72 hours that we went through. She worked and reported directly to me. It was a very rough experience. And she was supposed to come to work, and she never showed up, and then we realized and found out that all of this had happened. And then closely on the heels of that, probably 2 years or a year and a half on the heels of that, was the very infamous New Delhi rape incident, which was world famous and everybody knows about that. That happened. Those 2 incidents were hard, and I used to live in New Delhi at that time and travel to work probably 2 hours, drive to work for 2 hours, and it was a rough time. And then moved to Chicago, and my daughter left home. I think I read one of the poems on the show when I dialed in the last time, Scott,
Yeah.
a poem that I wrote for my daughter. But that was another one of those situations. It wasn't one moment, but it was a couple of different situations, and the fact that my daughter was growing up at that time and blossoming into a young girl and was also leaving home, and what was happening around me. And I will top that up. I moved to Chicago, and the elections happened, and Trump was coming. I mean, so there were things had happened, and somehow the narrative around with regard to women was very, very rough, and it changed something inside me and made me more aware at that time. So those two things, and the third very personal situation was the fact that I had a long distance marriage with my husband when I moved to Chicago. He and I lived away for 4 years. When I moved for work, for my personal career, and I lived here. He stayed behind in India, and we lived apart for 4 years. And that was, like I said earlier, it's a test of a relationship. It's a test on the family, and that was another life-changing moment or a milestone in life as well. So those 3 situations, I would say, really did carve out what probably I will be when I walk into the grave, or when I walk out of this world, on what I leave behind as my legacy.
Thank you for sharing about that, and very powerful experiences to have to bring in and deal with. And you talked about the poem that you read about your daughter on the last show, and I think maybe that's a good transition that I can turn the floor over to you here toward the end of the show and let you share a few selections from your book, if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm just going to take a sip of water, if you don't mind, and then I will.
Oh, certainly.
Absolutely.
Take your time. Take your time. It's been a pleasure talking with you here tonight, and been looking forward to hearing some of these poems, and I have been reading through your book here recently and enjoying it, especially that poem that I shared earlier about sharing. Just a lot of good wisdom and philosophical ideas, and all the themes.
Thank you for doing that. All right. I was hoping to, it's a little, do we have time, Scott? This one that I wanted to share is actually about the partition, and it's a little long. Is it okay for me to read this one?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'm going to read, this one's called The Mangroves, and it's from the section An Abridged World, if you have the book in front of you. The background, just taking 2 seconds here, is my dad and his family were in Pakistan and were dispersed when the partition between India and Pakistan happened, when the British occupied India was divided into 2 states, that is India and Pakistan. And as we all know, that division plunged the subcontinent into a crisis of turbulence and tragedy that people are still recovering from. Nearly 2 million people died, 15 million people were dispersed or displaced. The poem is called Mangroves, and this is about, it's a memory of my father actually going from India to Pakistan many, many decades later to revisit and to rediscover his roots, or what was his hometown or his home city. Mangroves. Act 1. I set out once looking for mangroves, with haunted stories about the withered woman with feet that turned inwards, the mangroves with secret spells hovering over lampposts, the mangroves where boys scuffled and where men gathered to grope for survival, the mangroves that displaced the rotten smell of burning flesh as each canopy collapsed into an ashen pile. Act 2. I waited. I waited to enter the looming arch of the house that echoed my mother's desires. In entombed gold and treasures, the house that watched, silent, the gates that creaked, each howling ground, recollecting a plea wretchedness of bruised bodies and naked shadows still lingering behind its walls. Still lingering behind its walls, Act 3. I walked. I walked the platform again, chugging wheels that recited memories of trains moving like ghosts between places, transporting phantoms. The platform I walked again covered me in suit of butchered history. I lifted some soil, some scars, some sketches. Act 4. I opened the tall gates. I opened the tall gates and entered against my will into the portico to my beginnings. I swaddled myself with the elegance of my mother, the industriousness of my father, the grit of my brothers, the sacrifice of my sisters, the flawlessness of their songs as they chanted, possessed to their dead and their crippled and their humiliated and their young and their newborn. Act 5, I bow in thankfulness and accept the warm tea served by the house lady on the veranda.
Wonderful poem and excellent recitation as well. The poems take on a new life, of course, when they're read by their creator. Is that something that you enjoy, the reading out loud, and do you ever make it to events there in the
Yes.
Chicago area?
I love it. Yes, I try my best to, and yes, I totally agree with you. Listening to what's written by the writer is something I really, really look forward to, and I enjoy so much.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that one, and we have time for another if you'd like.
Can I read one that's not from the book? I'd like to read one that's not from Shelling Peanuts and Stringing Words, but that's close to my heart. It was actually published in what's it's a website that somebody maintains dedicated to Delhi, the city, and it's very interesting, Scott. Actually, I'll share the link with you. You'll like it. This gentleman, he's like a photojournalist, and he documents New Delhi as a city, and he also documents ordinary residents of New Delhi writing an obituary to themselves. So this one is an obituary to myself that I wrote as an ex-resident of New Delhi. I used to live in New Delhi before I moved to Chicago, so this is an obituary to myself. The title is Remaining, an obituary to self, and the introductory lines are as follows. In leaving as in coming, Kashiana Singh left behind many monochromatic moments. She wrote down a few wishes on checkered pages, and in parentheses, as I said to you earlier, Scott, in parentheses, it says she loved checkered notebooks in penciled cursive hand. And then goes the poem. If I could plant myself on my Dada's knee again, I would listen, rapt as he fed me almonds, but I would feel his fingers where the knuckles knotted stories. If I could borrow my Nani's lace dupatta again, dupatta is a scarf. If I could borrow my Nani's lace dupatta again, I would remember to wear it like a pilgrimage. I would celebrate her indiscernible life, hewed into its layers. If I could hold my brother close to my chest, I would hold gently, and folding my arms around his neck, I would not let go, embracing ferociously till my breath became an extension of his. If I could place my daughter into the warmth of my womb, I would tell her to sink her pain into the innards of my being. I would drizzle into myself, into her bones, every speckle of sunshine. If I could do nothing when my son pottered around the kitchen, I would let the dishes sit longer and listen to his voice breaking. I would let the dishes sit longer and listen to his voice breaking. I would linger around and watch him becoming a composition. If I could bring a bouquet of time to my parents, if I could bring a bouquet of time to my parents, I would choose the largest one in the universe. I would infuse the petals with an aroma of whispering thanks. If I could sleep each past night again on a pillow beside you, I would relearn the forms and shapes of your presence. I would arrange my head into your arms, unwilling to awake. If I could harness moments, collect sounds, collapse days, I would swallow them into my gurgling veins as the waves wash my bodily offerings into an anticipating ocean. Remaining. That was Remaining, Scott.
Wow, lovely poem, and such an interesting concept to write one's own obituary. Was that a difficult process going through and
yes.
looking at it from that angle?
Oh, yes, of course.
I can imagine.
Yes, it was. But isn't it amazing? I was reading a Harvard article, and it seems that as Harvard has been doing some trainings for corporates, this has become a concept for team development to write an obituary and say, not for oneself, but to say, like, if Scott wrote an obituary for Kashiana, what would be the 2 lines or the 3 lines you would write, and vice versa? And it becomes a team development exercise because it helps in self-reflection to say, what does the other person think about you?
That is a very interesting concept, and I think from what we've learned here tonight, some of those words would be resiliency and the ability to overcome life's tragedies and stay centered in a positive and spiritual and worshipful momentum. And so that's what I've gleaned from this talk here tonight, Kashiana. It's been an absolute pleasure getting a chance to talk with you more in depth, and really enjoyed your book and your poems here tonight. And if there's any final words you'd like to leave with the audience, please do so, and let us know where we can find out more information. You mentioned your blog, and I think you have a YouTube channel. Please let us know where we can find all that.
Thank you, first of all, Scott. I'm humbled that you had me. Thank you so much. And I know we've been in touch, but it's been my absolute pleasure, and I appreciate you giving me the chance to come and talk to you and spend the time, and giving me more than that little time at night to spend with poetry and with you. So I appreciate it very, very much. In terms of where you can find you, you've already shared the YouTube channel, my Facebook page. I can leave that. If I haven't already given the link, Scott, I will give that to you. And if you can add that when you post the update, that will be awesome as well. And definitely I'm available on kashiana.singh@gmail.com for anyone who wants to get in touch with me and talk more about poetry. I'll be happy to have a conversation, reach out, and get in touch.
Wonderful. So some of those links that you just mentioned can be found in the show description box. Encourage everyone to go check them out and go pick up a copy of Kashiana's book as well. Once again, it's been a a pleasure, and I hope that you'll come back on again in the future and we can talk some more.
We'll be there again. Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. Have a good evening and a good night.
You as well, and happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that episode with Kashiana Singh. Please do go check out all her work and get in contact with her if you'd like to speak some more about what you heard here tonight. Hope that everyone's week is off to a great start. We will be back here next Monday on November 25th with Tay Davis joining the program. Met her at an event out in Alpharetta, Georgia earlier this year. Heard her read some of her work, and so looking forward to finding out more about her poetry as well, and that'll be coming up next Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, as always, here on Songs of Selah. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to end with another song recommendation that Kashiana had. This is Fix You by Coldplay.
When you try your best but you don't succeed, when you get what you want but not what you need, when you feel so tired but you can't sleep, stuck in reverse, and the tears come streaming down your face, when you lose something you can't replace, when you love someone but it goes to waste, could it be lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix you. High up above or down below, when you're too in love to let it go, but if you never try, you'll never know just what you